Hey there, it's Mark with Mark's Astro Journey. In this video, I'm going to do a first light on my William Optics RedCat 61 telescope, along with my ZWO ASI 2600 Pro camera. I chose 7 different targets in my first series of imaging sessions: the Soul Nebula, the Jellyfish Nebula, the Horsehead Nebula, the Rosette Nebula, California Nebula, Seven Sisters, and the Heart Nebula. In this video, I'm also going to talk about the workflow that I'm using in Pixinsight. This is another learning experience for me. The channel is Mark's Astro Journey, and really that's what it is for me. Amateur astronomy is a journey and a learning experience. So I'm kind of diving into Pixinsight. I've heard a lot of great things about it and how it can be very powerful, but it also has a pretty steep learning curve according to some people. So I watched videos, read articles, browsed their help documentation, and came up with what I felt like was a reasonable workflow for LRGB processing. So if you have expertise and experience using Pixinsight or in such workflows, I hope you'll feel free to leave comments on the video, because not only myself but other people who are on this journey of learning about amateur astronomy can learn from and benefit from your experience. When I ordered my telescope and my camera, I also ordered a new filter wheel as well as a filter set for this telescope and camera combination, because the camera has a larger sensor, and a filter with a smaller filter is not going to cover that sensor. And I just went ahead and went with 2-inch filters because I didn't want to limit myself in the future. I could have went with the 36 millimeter, I think, and would have covered the sensor, but I went ahead and opted for 2-inch filters. So anyways, that's another part of this challenge, is working with the undersized filter wheel. But I did want to go ahead and give the camera and the telescope a try. So I went ahead with this combination for these imaging sessions. So let's get started. So here you can see the target IC1848, the Soul Nebula in Nina. I typed in the name Soul Nebula. You could also put in IC1848 and clicked on Load Image. You'll notice that the width and height are set to the maximum for my ASI 2600 Pro camera. Has the pixel size as well as the focal length of my RedCat 61 telescope. So normally we would, before we get started on an imaging session, we could do things like slew and center to this with our telescope, determine rotation from the camera if we wanted to adjust the rotation, and then we can add our target to our sequence, right? So I'm just going to jump to the sequence to save time here. And you can see for this sequence, what I did is for this target, first of all, slewed and centered, started guiding, forcing calibration, cooled the camera, switched the filter to red, ran autofocus, and then I set to take 60 exposures at 60 seconds, 100 gain, offset of 4. And I did this very same pattern of steps for each of the filters. In this current imaging session, I was still limping along with my 5 position 1 1/4 filter wheel. So you're only going to see red, green, and blue and luminance here. Those are the only filters I was working with in this imaging session. So that's the setup in Nina that I used to capture the images. And so I ended up with 4 hours of data for the Soul Nebula. And next we can take a look at processing. I used Astropixel processor to stack the data. And when you stack LRGB data in Astropixel processor, it produces individual stack files for the 4 different channels. And here are those 4 files here. You'll notice also by the names that I used batch crop and light pollution correction in Astropixel processor to clean up the stacks. I'm fairly new to Pixinsight and also new to LRGB processing. I've watched a number of videos, read a number of articles, and some of the theory behind it. And so based upon that information, I came up with a workflow I've been following for these images. And I'm open to suggestions and what other people have learned from their experience. It's always good to learn tricks and tips from others, so please feel free to post any comments with suggestions you have. So basically, here's the first set of steps. I combine the RGB channels using the LRGB combination tool in Pixinsight, and then kind of set that aside, that image aside, and then give my primary focus or attention to the luminance channel. Then on the luminance channel, I apply dynamic background extraction and then attempt to do easy decon, although my impression is so far it's kind of an art form, trying to learn how to do that properly. I've been finding that increasing the pixel math and modifying the star mask are two ways to potentially reduce ringing around stars. That's what I'm seeing happen in a lot of images when I try to use Easy Decon. And I've had some mixed results in trying to get rid of that ringing effect. And then after decon is done, if I'm able to successfully use it, I'm also possibly using Blur Exterminator, or if I have trouble with Easy Decon, just using Blur Exterminator alone for that, steps 4 and 5. Then once that's done, I've been using the Easy Denoise. And then after that, combine the luminance channel into the RGB image using LRGB combination tool. And then I do image solving on the LRGB combined image. Then do photometric color calibration. After that, background neutralization. And then you start at 2 to create a starless image of the data, and also pixel math afterwards to create a stars only set of data. Next, I stretch the stars only data. This allows us to not blow out the stars in our stretching process. And then switch over to the starless data and stretch that. And usually I've been using the auto stretch that's included in Pixinsight. Use the screen transfer function to transfer that over to the histogram tool, and then just apply that, and then save the starless data with that stretch applied. Sometimes it seems like it's a little excessive on the stretch, and I've backed off the stretch a little actually after applying that auto stretch with the histogram tool, because in my opinion, it seems like it's doing too hard of a stretch. And then after that, I usually do a curves transformation on the starless data, and then use pixel math to combine the stars only and starless data back together. Then sometimes I found that after this, using the local histogram equalization option improves the contrast a little bit. And then if necessary, any minor curves adjustment to the combined data. And then lastly, a few steps. I've been either using easy star reduction or the morphological transformation to reduce the stars a little further. And then also I found that this HDR multi-scale transform really seems to bring out more of the data in the nebulosity. And it really helps bring out more of the details. And then lastly, this dark structure enhance is one way. Like if you look at some of the nebulosity, it'll have those what look like little filaments or channels that are darker. And this dark structure enhance option in Pixinsight really seems to do exactly that, enhance those where they show up a little better. And then lastly, sometimes, not always, I found that the unsharpen option will help take off a little bit of the, sometimes it seems like with some of these steps you get some what's almost too sharp, or it doesn't look natural, and sometimes as a final step this will soften those edges a little bit. And then once all this is done, I've been using, if I save any files along the way, I've been saving them in this XSLF format that Pixinsight uses, which is a newer, better format for storing the information. But to share the image anywhere else, I usually save it as a TIFF file, and that just is a file that's actually more transportable, right? Like more programs can open and understand what that TIFF file is. So I'll say it again, if you have any workflow or steps you found to be really successful if done in a certain order for certain types of targets, please post those in the comments. In watching videos and reading people's articles they've written, it seems like there's a lot of variation and nobody seems to follow the exact same sequence. Some seem to follow the same general sequence, but there's so many options in Pixinsight. So, you could learn probably for years and years about all the options in there. Okay, so now that the process part is over, the workflow, back to the Soul Nebula. This is what I ended up with from the 4 hours of data that I captured. And the one thing that I will say, if you look online, there's all kinds of images of the Soul Nebula, and I know some people are using other filters. Some people are even, if they use like, they're using Show with the Hubble palette, and I think there are a number of other palettes and false color combinations that people can use. I didn't get a number of those colors I see in a lot of those images, obviously because I'm just using LRGB, and I just have the normal channels, you know, red to red, green to green, and blue to blue. But anyways, this was an interesting outcome from just 4 hours of data and 60-second exposures. And of course I have, you know, flats, darks, and dark flats. Okay, so here in Nina for the Rosette Nebula, so I'm going to load that image, and here we can see, get an idea of what the Rosette Nebula looks like. Before we start our imaging session, I already have the sequence ready. I'm just going to jump there. And so here you can see that NGC2238 is the target. Basically, I have it set to slew and center, solve and sync, start my guiding, forcing calibration, switch to the first filter, red, run autofocus, cool the camera, and take 90 10-second exposures at gain of 100, offset of 4. The very same steps are repeated for green, blue, and luminance filters. And at the end, it stops guiding and parks the telescope. So I have to admit, on this target, I was doing a little bit of an experiment. I wanted to see if I only took 10-second exposures and 90 of those for each channel, what would the final result look like? So obviously, if I would do an imaging session with much longer exposures, say 3 minutes, probably would get more data and a better final outcome. But I was surprised at the level of detail I was able to get for only doing 90 10-second exposures. Anyways, I will target this again in the future, and I will do a longer exposure time. But this first round of images, I was just trying to see what would you get with, you know, like a shorter exposure time. So here in Nina, I'm going to look up the Horsehead Nebula, or IC434, and load that image. I'm also changing my width and height to be 50% of my maximum field of view to just a region of interest size, which I'm going to go for 50%. I'm also have my pixel size set to 3.76 and my focal length to 300 for my RedCat 61 telescope. And normally we would slew and center right and use the determine rotation if we want to adjust that for our camera, and then add this to the sequence. I've already done that. So I'm going to jump right to the sequence. And you can see here that IC434 is the target. In the beginning, I do this normal basic steps of slew and center, solve and sync, start guiding. I'm forcing calibration, cool the camera, switch to the red filter, my first one, and run autofocus. And then to focus in on only 50% of my maximum field of view for my camera, I'm using the region of interest, or take subframe exposure option. And so you can see I'm doing a 30 iterations loop and using 122nd for my exposure time. Gain is 100 and offset is 4. And again, region of interest is 50%. And then just scrolling down, you can also see I did the very same thing for the green filter, and then also for the blue filter, and then lastly for the luminance filter. And so here's a look at the final processed image. Again, 122nd exposures, 30 of those, so an hour of data captured on each channel. I definitely like this take subframe exposures, which allows us to limit the region of interest. In comparison with SharpCap, it's maybe not as nice because in SharpCap, it knows what all the various regions of interest sizes are for the camera, and you can pick the specific ones. But at least by choosing this, we can reduce the size of every one of the data files that's captured for every exposure, because, as you know, with a camera like the ASI 2600 mm Pro, it has this very large field of view, and if you're full field of view, that file is even larger for every exposure that you take. So being able to use this option does give us a nice way to reduce the overall size of the data captured, when really we're not interested in the entire field of view that could be captured. And here you can see the Jellyfish Nebula. It's really not filling up the field of view, right? I could capture some other interesting things while I was trying to capture the Jellyfish Nebula, or I could reduce my field of view and, use that as a smaller field of view so I don't have so much data to deal with since I'm really only interested in the Jellyfish Nebula itself. It brings my field of view more like what you see here on the screen. So I have the sequence here already, and you can see IC443 is the target. And then I'm going to take 300-second exposures at a gain of 100, offset of 4. I have region of interest set to 50%. And so what you'll see after this is for each filter, I'm going to switch filter, run autofocus, and then I'm going to actually, do another one of these loops for 15 iterations. So again, I did 5-minute exposures, 15 of them, or an hour and 15 minutes for all 4 of the channels. I thought this turned out pretty good for the minimal amount of data that I was able to capture, and the first time trying to process an LRGB data set for the Jellyfish Nebula in Pixinsight. So here in Nina, in the framing assistant, I've loaded IC1805 or the Heart Nebula, and I already have the sequence open. I'm not connected to the equipment, so please ignore the alert icons that Nina displays. But you can see that it is the target. I have the basic steps to start an imaging session, and I'm taking 90 60-second exposures for each channel. And so here's the final image processed from the 6 hours of data I captured for the Heart Nebula. And so here in Nina, in the framing assistant, I have the 7 sisters or Pleiades loaded up so we can see the image in the framing assistant. I already have the sequence open, and so here's the sequence. And again, since my equipment's not connected right now, I'm just seeing the definition, but it throws the icons every time it sees the equipment's not attached. But you can see M45 is the target, and if you look down below at the sequence of steps after the basic steps to set up the session. For each filter, I am doing 90 exposures at 10 seconds, 100 gain offset of 4. So with 90 10-second exposures on each channel, this is basically 15 minutes of time captured for each channel. So it wasn't a lot of data captured. I think I was in between targets, and I was at the meridian flip, and there was some time where I was going to have to wait. So I figured I would go ahead and just take advantage of capturing some other target for about the hour of time that I had. So next in Nina, I've loaded up in the framing assistant an image of the California Nebula, or NGC 1499. Here I have the sequence already open. I'm not connected to my equipment again, so please ignore the alert icons. But you can see after the basic steps to set up an imaging session, I am actually capturing 360 10-second exposures for each filter. So I did the 360 10-second exposures kind of as an experiment. Again, with these first few imaging sessions, I wanted to see kind of a different variety of combinations of exposures and duration to see what kind of outcome I would get. But I wouldn't do that very often because 360 files for each filter, it takes up a lot of disk space. So I would do longer exposures, I think, in the future if I tried the California Nebula again. So even though they were brief exposures of 10 seconds, with 360, I basically captured an hour per filter. And so here you can see the results of the 4 hours of data processed. So I hope you enjoyed this review of kind of the first light for my RedCat 61 telescope and my ASI 2600 Pro camera, and some of the data that I captured and the images that I was able to produce. And I hope only from here I can get better and improve. Please leave any comments you have, suggestions, observations. And the good news is that while I was processing some of this data, the new 2-inch filter wheel and filters finally arrived. So I have the Optolong LRGB, H-alpha, and sulfur and oxygen filters. So that's something I've recently been working on and had a few imaging sessions, and the results with that look very promising. And again, another total new learning thing is taking, the hydrogen, alpha, sulfur, and oxygen data and mapping that to like a color palette and some of those type of things that you have to discover and learn how to do. So a lot of new and interesting things to work through, and looking forward to being able to produce some even better images with that capability now. If you enjoy videos on topics like this, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel and click on the notifications icon. That way, anytime I put out a new video, you'll get notified and you can take a look. And also to share a video or mention it to anyone else you think might enjoy it. So wishing you clear skies.